Hi, I'm Cory Skimming from the product marketing team at VMware Tanzu, and today I'm joined by Torin Sandall from SpringOne sponsor Styra. Hi, Torin.
Hey, Cory. Great to be on.
We're so happy to have you here. To kick us off, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Styra?
For sure, yeah. So my name is Torin Sandall. I am the VP of Open Source at Styra. I'm also one of the co-creators of the Open Policy Agent, or OPA project, as we like to call it. OPA is a graduated CNCF project that helps people or large organizations manage policy and authorization. And so at Styra, what I do on a day-to-day basis is really focus on making sure that the Open Policy Agent community is healthy and vibrant and continuing to grow. So yeah, that's sort of me. I spent most of my career working as a software engineer. I used to be what I call like a dark matter developer. I was sort of just like working on proprietary products that maybe never saw the light of day. But yeah, for the last 6 years, I've been working on open source with Kubernetes and OpenStack and the sort of the cloud native kind of like ecosystem.
So if we think about kind of companies or the enterprise journey for digital transformation that we've been seeing over the last several years, when we think about companies kind of shifting to cloud native and microservices, how have authorization needs changed now that there are all these smaller microservices kind of floating around?
I think that one of the factors that's driving digital transformation and app modernization is this ever sort of increasing need or desire that organizations, companies have to move faster, right? They want to have new offerings, new services. They want to ship new features. They want to make better experiences for their customers, right? And so what a lot of organizations are doing is adopting processes and technologies that allow them to sort of accelerate and have people kind of be more productive, right? And so sort of with the rise of things like microservices and more generally like cloud technology over the past decade or so, what we're seeing is just a proliferation of all kinds of different technology choices that developers have. Which is great because those developers are now more productive, right? They can choose what technologies are a better fit for the problem that they're solving, and they can also kind of make their own choices. They don't have to be tied into this one monolithic application that the organization is responsible for. They can kind of operate in independence, which is great from a velocity point of view, right? If you want to do more, well, do it together, do it in parallel, right? Don't try to do it all on one track. But at the same time, that introduces a lot of interesting challenges for large organizations, especially those in heavily regulated spaces, finance, healthcare, public sector, retail, right? There's a lot of controls that need to be put in place in order to ensure the safety of data, in order to ensure the safety of the system. And the challenge when you've got all these different ways of doing things, or all these different ways of building and deploying applications, is that you have all these different ways of managing permissions and authorization and access control, and really like just who can do what, like what can do what in the system. And so that's where OPA and Styra kind of come into the picture.
Digging into that a little bit more, how specifically does Open Policy Agent and above and beyond Styra make this authorization management process easier for dev teams and ops teams?
Yeah, so if you just look at this slide, the way things used to work is that like every single logo on this slide would have their own way of enforcing policy, of expressing like policy, basically, right? And so as an administrator, if you were tasked with hardening or ensuring that the organization has a strong security posture, then you'd have to go into each and every one of these different systems and configure them and program them appropriately, right? And so you're talking about dozens or possibly hundreds of programming languages, dozens of databases, dozens or hundreds of service frameworks, all kinds of different CI/CD systems, different workload platforms, different cloud providers, different types of servers, and so on, right? And so there's just this kind of like explosion, this high cardinality problem space that any administrator would have to deal with. And so what we do with OPA is, instead of having a different way of kind of specifying permissions and policy, across the stack, we provide one unified way of expressing rules that control who can do what. And then we provide an engine that you can take and you can plug into really any piece of software on the planet at any layer of the stack to have those rules enforced, have them executed, evaluated, and ultimately enforced by different pieces of software. In the past, a lot of the time, like the rules that govern how these large complex systems should behave, like those rules would just be kept in people's heads. They were kind of maintained through tribal knowledge, like within the organization. So, if you're an app developer and you want to get your application deployed, you'd have to go and talk to somebody over in another department. You have to go to another floor, another building or whatever, and talk to that person and get them to like set the firewall rules just right for your perimeter network or whatever in order, or you have to get traffic allowed in. It was like this very kind of laborious, time-consuming process that slowed down deployments, slowed down developments, and ultimately just slowed down like bringing value to the business. So that approach just doesn't really work in more modern kind of cloud native environments where you've got applications being deployed, every hour or, dozens of times per day, right? You just can't keep up, right? So you need to automate, but at the same time, when you automate, you need to be careful that you're implementing all of those controls and safeguards that are necessary for the long-term continuity of the business, right? A lot of the time, these policies have a tremendous role to play in adherence to external compliance and regulation, to internal compliance, to operational best practices. A lot of time these policies prevent the system from going down, right? And sometimes it's even worse for the business if they go down and they're not selling things than it is if they have a security breach. So policy is sort of everywhere and it applies across the stack, which makes it a really interesting problem, I think.
Obviously security is a very hot topic now as we start to see DevSecOps being the big term right now around incorporating security kind of into that development or into that DevOps process. So it sounds like Styra and Open Policy Agent, OPA, fit really nicely into that workflow to make it, easier to deliver software that is better, but also to deliver it faster and in a secure manner. Totally,
yeah. So OPA kind of, it embodies this idea of policy as code, meaning you should be able to take the rules that govern how the system should behave, and you should be able to take those and codify them, and then apply all your standard, software engineering best practices to them, like, unit testing and version control and code review, and progressive deployments and all those great things. And then get them kind of enforced automatically in the system in such a way that they're easy to maintain and understand and change and control and evolve over time. I think that one of the things that we see a lot, especially when we talk to developers, is that you can spend a lot of time building authorization logic or functions into your applications and into your platforms. And so OPA helps remove some of that like heavy lifting that organizations do all the time when it comes to authorization. There's other problems in the security space, like authentication, for example, is largely standardized, right? Like there are well-established ways of verifying identities in web apps and in the enterprise and on mobile and in infrastructure. But authorization has always been this kind of like elusive thing that every organization's had to solve for themselves in the past. But now with OPA, they have a kind of a sort of a de facto standard open approach to enforcing those rules or getting those rules enforced.
So if we're looking at, some of our audience for SpringOne, so the Spring developer community, if they wanted to get started with OPA or Styra today, where should they go?
So to get started with OPA, what I recommend doing is just going to openpolicyagent.org. That's the website for the project. And on openpolicyagent.org, we have a number of tutorials that people can try out in order to familiarize themselves with Open Policy Agent. If you're building a Spring-based microservice, we have a Spring security plugin that integrates with OPA, so you can just drop that into your Spring app, and then you've got the integration with OPA to offload policy decisions to the engine. We've got examples of how you can use OPA within Kubernetes to enforce all kinds of guardrails over your clusters. So I think there's tons of stuff on there that the developers at SpringOne will find super useful. When it comes to Styra, what we provide at Styra is essentially a best-in-class tool to help you operationalize OPA within your organization. So you can kind of think of OPA almost as the data plane for policy. It's the piece of software that runs next to each and every piece of your application or your infrastructure that kind of evaluates the rules and provides decisions back to your software. And Styra is sort of the management plane. It gives you kind of a single pane of glass, single place you can go to manage the full policy life cycle, from everything to do with like policy authoring to policy distribution to policy testing and validation and impact analysis to auditing and more. One other thing I'll just mention is that we have an online course. If people want to go to academy.styra.com, they can check out that online course. This is a course developed by Tim Hinrichs, who's one of the other co-creators of Open Policy Agent, and he's the CTO of Styra. It's a great course if you want to learn about the basics of Open Policy Agent, and if you want to train yourself and become an expert on OPA's policy language. So it's straight from the creators of the language, and we think it's a really great resource for people that are learning about OPA for the first time.
Awesome. Sounds like a great way to get started. Thanks, Torin.
Great. Thanks a lot, Cory.